Hello, everyone. I'm Babak Abbaszadeh, President and CEO of Toronto Centre. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to the executive panel on Innovation at the Frontier, how emerging market technologies are shaping central banking and supervision. It always gives me a great pleasure to moderate these sessions if my team lets me. Anyway, here we are. We have 491 participant registrants, including supervisors and regulators from emerging markets and developing economies, as well as colleagues from the IMF, the World Bank, and other important institutions, plus developed jurisdictions. So there's a high interest in this. Your presence reflects how central this topic has become for the global supervisory community. Artificial intelligence, advanced analytics, and expanding data capabilities are transforming how financial risks can be identified and monitored. For supervisors, this presents both opportunity and responsibility. Innovation can strengthen early warning systems and enhance risk analysis. At the same time, it raises important questions about judgment, accountability, governance, and trust, issues we will explore. These go to the heart of the supervisory mandate. At Toronto Centre, our focus has been implementation, and since 1998, we have trained more than 32,000 supervisors and regulators across 190 jurisdictions. Tools evolve, but supervisory responsibility does not. Technology can support judgment, but it cannot replace it. Today's discussion will explore how emerging technologies are reshaping the mandate and what capabilities institutions must now have to be able to remain effective. We're very fortunate to have two distinguished speakers. Stefan Ingves is the chair of Toronto Centre's board of directors. He brings deep expertise as the former central banker, governor of the Central Bank of Sweden, and two-time former chairman of the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, and he has led institutions through both innovation and crisis. Our friend Beju Shah is the head of the BIS Toronto Innovation Hub Center, is at the forefront of translating emerging technologies into practical supervisory tools. We will have 3 rounds for you for the discussion, and I encourage you to begin to put your questions in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to get to as many questions as we can, and please be brief in your questions so that we can actually read them. Stefan, let me begin with you. So at a strategic level, rapid technological change has already begun to reshape the supervisory mandate itself. Here's the dilemma. Supervisors are often told they must innovate faster to be on top of important trends and emerging risks, but they're also told to remain conservative and not take their eyes off the ball. Where do you think supervisors should draw clear boundaries on the use of AI, even if technology appears capable? Thank you.
Thank you, Babak, for the question, and thank you also for giving me the opportunity to say a few words when it comes to this highly interesting topic. First of all, we need to focus on and we need to understand what new technologies can do, because new technologies sort of come and go, and we have had many versions of various technologies also in the past. But the key to it is really to get a good feeling for what is it that really we want a particular new technology to do. And that can be actually quite challenging. Let me start with the private sector, because in the private sector, everything used to be on paper. And that's what we have sort of, in some sense, inherited. Going forward, it's pretty obvious that we're going to move into, and already have moved into, a world where nothing will be on paper. Everything will be digital in one form or the other. And that, of course, presents new opportunities, but it also presents new risks, and then you need to understand those risks. And when you're on the public sector side, you're stuck with the similar types of issues, because then you need to ask yourself the question, what are the rules supposed to be? And whose job is it to design those rules? And in this new environment, how do I understand the risks, and how do I deal with these risks? And also, you actually need to come up with a conclusion when you run a supervisory agency, for example. how do I use these new technologies, and which ones am I actually supposed to uh, use? And let me add one fundamental conclusion of mine when it comes to all of this, and that is that AI does not change anything when it comes to you yourself being responsible. AI can maybe help, but responsibility actually remains and lies with normal human beings. And an old argument that I have come across a few times in the past, particularly when I was dealing with bank restructuring and banking crisis management, was someone who said the bank was actually okay. It was the macro that did it. And then my answer was always, well, then you better understand the macro. Because it doesn't change anything. You are still responsible when you run a supervisory agency or when you run a bank. And in the future, it just won't work to say AI did it. That's not good enough. You better understand AI because you will still be responsible for what is going on, and that is because new technologies, they do not absolve you from responsibility. And I do think that we need to be aware of that all the time. And to Babak's introduction, that kind of, on the one hand, means that you need to understand where we're heading. But on the other hand, when it comes to the old-fashioned rules of the game in terms of responsibility, you just have to stick to those old rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. And it's always a pleasure to hear you speak about these things because you break down very complicated concepts into way that people can actually understand. And if I can take you back to some of the board discussions we had a couple of years ago, you remember Beju's colleagues in London, the BIS Innovation Hub London, had asked Toronto Centre to write a chapter on Supervisor of the Future and AI. And I think one thing that I remember from all the discussions we had internally at Toronto Center was our big conclusion, spoiler alert, was that you can use AI all you want, but at the end of the day, it comes down to judgment and critical thinking. And goes back to your word about you can't blame the macro, you can't blame the AI. With critical thinking and judgment also comes accountability. So I think that's one of the things that I think I'm also hearing from part of your message. So, Beju, in this first round that we're talking, which is mandate to practice, I want to ask you, given the transformation supervisors are experiencing, could you highlight one or two BIS Innovation Hub projects that illustrate how AI or advanced analytics are already changing supervisory practice, and what supervisors should realistically take away from these experiences? Thank you.
Thank you, Babak, and thank you to the Toronto Centre for inviting me on this esteemed panel with former Governor Ingves as well. It's actually great to be able to do this panel with Stefan too. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, before I begin, just to say that the opinions and messages I share during this presentation are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of the BIS. So I think let me just start with some observations rather than a project list, because I think that captures more honestly kind of where we are with the work. And I think I would say, we've had one of the most important shifts in supervisory innovation right now is not the fact that AI is becoming powerful or we're wanting to use it, though it is. I think the important shift is, and Stefan talked this around accountability and everything else, is around the discipline about how we're deploying it, how we're thinking about it. That's maturing. So supervisory innovation, I would say, is we're having to think about it being more engineered, more testable, more evidence-bound. And I guess for this audience, this shift in discipline is perhaps more consequential than any single tool or prototype. And let me frame that around three ideas, because I think that, and then I can weave in some project names in there, but I think they travel further than the project ideas. I think one of the first things is to think in terms of supervisory stacks and not tools. And the gains come in kind of deploying supervisory capability don't come from just deploying a single model or a product. They come from building a coherent architecture in the same way we build other data systems. So in this case, data analytics, human judgment, human behavior, governance, and all the controls and risk management need to come together and fit deliberately. Projects that we've done in the past, such as like Ellipse and Aurora, matter not for what they produce, but again, as an example of the architectural thinking behind them. So for example, Ellipse showed that integrating structured and unstructured supervisory data could improve early warning capability, whereas Aurora, for example, came up with a design pattern that showed how network analytics and privacy-enhancing technologies and also graph neural networks can surface patterns that no single institution can see alone. So the point is not only what these projects produce, but it's the architectural thinking and principles behind them. So they show what becomes possible when you think about the design of a system properly from the ground up, rather than just layering AI onto kind of a fragmented data environment, hoping that coherence will emerge. Data will always remain fragmented, but these new technologies allow you to put a common layer around it and look at these things in a more holistic way, but we also have to design our thinking in a very holistic way. Second, I think one thing is that the sequence matters. It always begins with solid foundations, and ultimately that begins with data and with AI systems, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you're not building off of good foundations, you're already lost. AI is not going to magically solve all of this for you. And I think, where there is real progress being made, the first investment was not necessarily in algorithms. It was in the boring, unglamorous foundations, machine readable reporting, common data models, data quality governance, risk controls, that sort of thing. And that only becomes more acute when you add on AI related aspects around that. They actually become really important because you are giving the models the map. I mean, it's like dealing with a child. It needs rules. It needs to understand that that's a door. You open it. You don't put your hand in the fire, right? That sort of thing. That work does feel slow, but without it, that analytical layer, that kind of thing that you're putting a lot of intelligence around and hoping it's cannot generate sustained value and will create data risks and everything over time. I think supervisors who underestimate the data problem and overestimate the AI solution tend to end up with quite impressive prototypes. But, then the rubber hits the road with operational reality. I think third on this point is to be deliberate about, what you're already doing well, what is deterministic, and then what can appropriate be probabilistic. Validation checks, concentration indicators, network pattern detection, and so on. These should be deterministic with clear provenance and full auditability. And that's not a limitation. That'll be a design choice because that preserves things like explainability and accountability through tried and tested means. And we do that by construction. Where, if you're bringing in probabilistic AI, which Jenny and it can be, for example, as a bounded interpretation layer on top of that deterministic foundation. So this is just some thinking, and that could help, for example, supervisors synthesize evidence, not generating primary things independently. And this is some of the thinking that's kind of emerged from some of the projects that we have underway. So the value is not the prototype or look how fast you can do something. It's actually the discipline that goes around it, comparing approaches, understanding trade-offs, and understanding where AI assistance and synthesis can add value and where it does not, and actually what risks is it introducing and other behavioral things too. So yeah, just to kind of clear up on this point, so the key message really is we're not thinking about automating judgment. It's actually AI in this case should be thinking about better triage, clearer traceability, and importantly, better use of scarce supervisory capacity, all while keeping accountability exactly where it belongs.
Thank you very much, Beju. I think it's really interesting because both you and Stefan, I think the key point that you're talking about is agency, right? The fact that, and I heard the word deliberate from you a few times. You kind of know where you're going, right? Otherwise, what's the point of using AI? And I hope more and more people will begin to hear and heed that message. Now we're going to go to our second round of questions. And the theme for this round is governing innovation, risk and trust, and accountability. So I guess accountability keeps coming back. Again, I'll remind the audience, please put your questions in the Q&A. So once the Q&A begins, we can just go do rapid fire questions. Stefan, I'm going to go back to you and for the first question here. As AI and advanced analytics move closer to core supervisory decisions, what do you see are the biggest risks for credibility, accountability, and due process if governance frameworks do not keep pace? Thank you.
Well, let me start out mentioning the concept risk-based supervision. Because over the years, we have many times at the Toronto Center been asked to help out in different corners of the world to sort of implement risk-based supervision. And that is really about how you go about doing it, turning it into something which is more than just words. And as an aside, we have just recently put out a paper on this topic. Here, when it comes to risk-based, when I was sort of thinking about what to say, it struck me that in many cases, when you think about risk-based supervision, it bothers people because you realize that I also have a large number of small financial institutions. And at the same time, with limited resources, there are so many of them, so I can absolutely not keep track of all of them at the same time. And with limited resources, and that's what risk-based supervision is all about. I have to pass judgment on what to look into. And then, of course, the major financial institutions is usually where you end up spending your resources. But having said that, that also creates an environment, and this supervisors know very, very well, is that there is no upside in supervision. So also is if a tiny institution goes under, maybe it doesn't matter to the system as a whole, but you still get the blame. And here, AI or proper collection of data in combination with I do think in the future potentially with reference to what Beju talked about, can be quite helpful because then if we have proper data and if we have proper AI systems in place, they can probably increase productivity in the sense that it ought to be possible to use these new technologies to flag issues also in small institutions. And if that flagging is being done properly, then actually that can be quite helpful, I do think, when it comes to how you go about doing these things with the limited resources. So properly managed, but that actually assumes that you have proper data. Because without proper raw data, it doesn't really matter what you do, because as Beju said, garbage in, garbage out. But for the sake of the argument, let's assume that also in the private sector they have been asked to provide you also in small institutions with sort of relevant data. Then you can actually increase, in my view, probably over time, your what I would call your supervisory productivity dealing with this. But that doesn't mean, of course, that AI sort of takes care of your decisions. Eventually, at the end of the day, you have to decide for yourself. And that means that it takes us full circle back to traditional issues like supervisory independence, legal protection, properly staffed agencies, basic management procedures that make sense, governance and things like that. And they are really about the rules of the game and human behavior. And AI certainly can't replace those things because you still have to run your own agencies. But I do think that AI can help you in running your own agencies. Thank you.
Stefan, you're saying just figure out their right, division of labor. Don't outsource judgment. Essentially, that's what you're saying. And RBS, risk-based supervision, as you said, is a very big part of our product offering. And, that's always a tough issue because people want a template when in fact it's not about a template, it's about that judgment. Thanks for that. Let me turn back again to our friend Beju in the same round. So, Beju, drawing on Innovation Hub's experience, how are central banks and supervisors grappling with issues like explainability, model risk, and accountability in practice? And do you see enough international collaboration? So it's one thing for me and Stefan and others to say, you got to pay attention to this, but what do you see practically happening? Thank you.
I mean, yeah, it's exactly that. I mean, those three areas: explainability, model risk, accountability. They go generally really to the center of the agenda, and that's what's on everyone's mind, really. So it's not a complete technical challenge as such. It's also a governance challenge. I want to be kind of frank here, because sometimes I think when people are talking about those three areas, it can be a bit more confident in its framing, just because I think these tools are fast, they're easy, they look like, giving you everything they need, but actually the evidence and the growing research body is that actually we need to be more mindful, concerned about these things. So let me separate those three questions. So explainability, simplified as, can we extend why the system produced this output? How can I, and that also goes into defensibility as well, right? Model risk, so does it behave reliably under real-world conditions, including drift and edge cases? And accountability, when an AI-assisted process informs a consequential outcome, who owns it, who can defend it, and so on. And so I say it's a governance thing. Those three areas require different institutional responses. So we can't treat them as one question, because they're quite different, and addressing one only addresses them partially. So we need to think about this. So I think on explainability, I think one of the most practical answers, as I said before, is architectural, particularly in our environments. So, for example, where you can think about applying probabilistic AI as a bounded layer on top of deterministic traceable analytics. So that way, the explanation doesn't need to be, because the model said so, or I've got a chain of thought reasoning, or whatever it might be. Actually, what we're moving towards is, here is what the pattern detected. Here's the evidence base. Here's a reasoning base. Here's how the model helped us to understand that. Okay. But it was also a way of kind of thinking, well, am I getting the same outputs? Am I getting the same responses? Is the model behaving the same way? Or if I shift models, am I still getting the same supervisory outcomes? So all of that becomes a more defensible position, potentially in a supervisory or maybe even a legal context, where you have that evidence base. You're not just going, the model did it, great, wow. Whereas a black box presented output doesn't do that. And I think this is where some of the projects we have on, they really do matter, because actually we are thinking about the supervisor's challenge function, not just a toolkit, and thinking about giving tools that evaluate, or thinking about what the tools for transparency, fairness, robustness, bias, all these things come in. I mean, we're discussing one example of, for example, if you are supervising cross-border firms and you're ingesting different data, right? Is your model treating it the same way? Because actually there could be cultural and contextual bias in the way that the language is written, right? In some cultures, apparently, for example, everything's the art of the possible, just in the mindset, the language. So, how does that come up in supervisory judgments? There's also research bodies that say actually most large language models, for example, are weighted to be closer to German in how they're constructed, and less so, for example, Eastern languages. And that can also create things. I think these are real things that we have to be mindful of, especially in automated systems. So yeah, you can't simply just accept the firms' documentation of their own systems and everything else. There are also things around, are there adversarial attacks that come in? How can you detect, explain all that? Now on model risk, I think, some institutions are experimenting, some are still stretching, some are or stretching kind of frameworks that were designed for traditional statistical models, or and stretching them to cover machine learning applications that they may not be designed for. And that can create blind spots. So, as I go back to the point I made before, it's about building assurance into the architecture, replay testing, regression triggers when configurations change, controls for failure modes, these systems, for like kind of deal with risks or issues that these systems could be susceptible to. Right. So what you need is almost a way that the architecture also then ties to a structured assurance regime embedded in the system itself, right? And then on accountability, the principle is simpler. The kind of, and Stefan's mentioned this, that the human supervisor, the institution represent always remain accountable, right? AI will only support supervision. It doesn't displace, or will never, or should not displace supervisory judgment. It doesn't replace accountability. It doesn't replace accountability. But all of that requires investment in the infrastructure around the stack. Audit trails, data engineering, data design, governance structures, enterprise risk management, and then institutional ownership of the decision chain too. So I think what we're also kind of realizing through the work is that actually a lot more experimentation, implementation work needs to be around that, I think, more. And, and a lot of our projects are advancing that way. Last point you mentioned is on international collaboration. I think, yes, there is more meaningful progress, but being honest, I don't think there's nearly enough yet. But it's happening more and more where these things, I think as we understand more and these issues come to the front, you're able to have more of a dialogue. So yeah, I think the more we talk, the more we kind of raise these issues, because actually we are still learning about how these systems work. And I mean, you only need to research some of the kind of AI alignment research, AI safety research, and so on to understand actually there's a lot that impacts supervisory use or potential supervisory use of AI systems. And I think this is where some of our projects look at that and going, okay, well, what does that mean in practice, right? What do we need to be thinking about? Because actually this is very real, especially as Stefan mentioned, everything will become more digital, right? Maybe reporting cycles will shorten, we'll get more real-time data in certain things. Some firms are more digitally native than others, so that may also require a different way of thinking about how they're supervised, for example. So these are things that just kind of, I'm just talking from an innovation point of view, not a policy point of view. So yeah.
Thank you, Beju. So what do you think is the obstacle to more international collaborations? Is it just the fact that this is fairly new and we're all trying to figure it out, or is there some things have to happen to spur more collaboration? Do you have any views on that?
I think it's similar to what I said. I think the more we learn, the more we understand where the risks and issues are, and then where we need to come together. And that's no different to any other kind of technologies that have come to play in the past. It's the more we learn, the more better questions we ask. We understand actually this is more pressing now. You only have to look at cybersecurity to all the things that are happening in cyber resilience now, right? So just if you look at that as a bit of a journey, there's some learnings and parallels in there, I think.
The third and final round of our structured questions, and after that we go to your Q&As. So this round is about building supervisor of the future. So I refer to the paper that we wrote. Stefan, let me begin with you again. Looking ahead, what institutional changes should supervisors prioritize first to ensure that innovation strengthens financial stability rather than undermines it? Always a good thing. And which elements should be treated as a global public good? Thank you.
Well, first of all, and a bit in addition to what Beju just talked about, and from a different field, I have been involved in monetary policy for almost 30 years. And when you hold a press conference, and if you were to start out saying, the model told me to increase the policy rate, then your arguments are kind of dead on arrival. And here we have a similar issue when it comes to supervisory issues, that it is really about understanding how the tools that you use can help you. But it is not about relying 100% on the tools and nothing else, because most people don't trust machines in that fashion. And both on the supervisory side and on the monetary policy side, in most cases, you have some kind of an executive board or something like that with many different individuals. And you just have boards with many different individuals because it's up to them to collectively come to a conclusion. And for them to say that we rely on one single model and nothing else, that's not really credible. That's not how the real world works. And that's why it's so important how to combine human judgment and different experiences from different walks of life with what the models can do in order to help you. But now, what to do and when to do things and how to do them. The hard part is really in this field to try to be what I call a public sector entrepreneur. And that sounds like an oxymoron because many, many, you find probably more entrepreneurs in the private sector than in the public sector, but you still have to be a public sector entrepreneur. And that means that you have to pass judgment and decide on how to use these new tools that are available and how to put them to good use. And as part of that process, it really makes sense also from time to time to quite intensively actually talk to the private sector and to understand how they use or potentially use these new tools available to them. But at the same time, I do think that there are some old truths that don't go away, and let me mention a few of them, and they're not at all model specific. First of all, markets function the worst when you need them the most. And the models will rarely tell you that that is the case. And if you're a supervisor, part of your job is always to go and try to find where leverage has gone. Usually, leverage is hidden somewhere, but just go and chase it. And here, of course, technology can change, but given that this is a moving matter and things change over time, if your models have been calibrated on yesterday, then they don't always give good advice when it comes to the future. But having said that, when it comes to money or monies or assets, liabilities, the financial sector, this is really about what we have in our heads. And most of the things have been tried in the past, also when everything was paper-based. And most of the things that have been tried in the past have also gone wrong in one way or the other. So setting technologies aside, we certainly can learn from history. And at the same time, and this is where it gets complicated to combine human judgment with what the models can do in order to help you. And that is that if you run into something which seems to be too good to be true, that's probably the case. And the only issue is when the whole thing is going to blow up. And again, we're sort of full circle back to passing judgment. But you can pass judgment by the help of the models, but never trust them 100%.
Maybe you mentioned that, but I just wanted to draw it out a little bit more. Which elements should be treated as public goods, do you think, in this conversation?
I do think it's actually quite important that we're transparent when it comes to these things. So I do think it's very, very important that we are willing and able to, if we start using new types of models, to put it all out there so that others can take a look and also others can pass judgment. Because it's a very difficult spot and not a good spot to be in at all if you do not fully understand what you base your decisions on, and you are supported by technology which essentially is a black box, and you cannot understand that black box. And if you are open and transparent and honest about what you try to achieve, then hopefully others will take a look at as well. And that will actually create a lot more comfort in the system compared to others criticizing you, and you end up defending your black box without fully understanding what your black box actually is doing. So be as open as possible, and that certainly is a very, very, in my view, a very important public good element of it. But having said that, when you do that, you are bound to get criticized. And central bankers and supervisors are human beings, and sometimes they find it incredibly unpleasant to get criticized, but that kind of goes with the territory.
So basically, have a very tough skin, and transparency. Another way of looking at that is that the expression, the sunshine is the best disinfectant. Okay, let's go back to Beju for the final question in the structured round, and then we're going to open it up. So, Beju, based on Innovation Hub's work across multiple jurisdictions, what capabilities matter most for supervisors to build first? Skills, data infrastructure, partnership, and which types of innovations are most transferable to emerging and developing economies? Thank you.
So I think, on capabilities that supervisors should build first and how much that transfers, I think both questions deserve equal weight. If you talk about on the sequencing point, I think not just from work that we've been doing here, but actually just in my previous experience as well, first and foremost is obviously your people and your operating model come first, and then your data, then your analytics, and then your AI. Where and only where it kind of can add genuine value. And that's also incremental, right? Because as those capabilities evolve, organizational capabilities evolve, your ability to understand kind of risks, information security aspects, all these other things, they evolve. And the other components in the organization or other controls evolve, then you're able to kind of then maybe think about where other use cases where it can be used more effectively. You may also learn that actually what you're doing today is perfectly fine, right? Unless there's an operational need to kind of use your resources better. So that order is not always intuitive, and particularly, and I think Stefan mentioned earlier, when you're under pressure to demonstrate innovation quickly, that again goes back to kind of what I said before about doing things in a very structured, orderly, kind of measured pace, because that way you're building the foundations for all these things to build off of. But that's the kind of logical order that tends to work. It's not always a thing, because obviously with things like AI and so on, I can spin up ideas very quickly, show that to my boss and go, oh, great, we can do all these things. But that's not necessarily the best way. I think it's good just to show the art of the possible, but to kind of get there, it does require good discipline. I mean, you only have to look at cybersecurity, for example, where even with all the latest tools, the basic engineering practices, the basic technical things still don't go away. The fundamental kind of hygiene things don't go away, and that is true for AI too. On the institutional side, I'll say that it's an organizational design challenge, not a technology challenge. I think it's being able to bridge both the technical and the people aspect. So you need, as I said, the types of skills that we'll need now, for example, enough fluency to be able to, if you're a supervisor, to actually work technically, but also in a non-technical way. So to ask the right questions, to critically think, to procure, to help think about what you're procuring, and then also think about the outputs that need to be challenged and not just accepting what the model's giving you. I think one thing that kind of our subtech work, even though I really don't like that term, but we call it subtech, it's pointing to kind of a institutional capability with a clear mandate and ownership, and also moving from pilots to operational deployment in that kind of measured way. If you don't have that clear ownership or that path or that kind of migration path that's doing it in a measured way, in an evidence way, in a kind of agile way, with that kind of direction in mind, you're just going to stay in the land of promising experiments, right? I mean, this is a comment sometimes we get about our work, but our work is also art of the possible, to kind of say, provide that landscape of the land, right? To saying, okay, these are the types of things you should be talking about. But if you really want these things to scale, it is doing things in a kind of measured, step-by-step way, and beginning with the fundamentals, right? And that's more of it's a technology problem, yes, but it's also kind of an organizational kind of design problem, and also that trade-off between needing to get results and deploying tech and efficiency and everything else. On the technical side, look, it really comes back to get the data right first. It means data contracts, validation rules, schema versioning, provenance, auditability, all these things, right? But also trust scoring, especially if you're using automated ingestion of sources. And I don't think, without those basic things, you're not going to get the ability to produce outputs that are auditable, defensible, explainable, and so on. And so that foundation is really core to kind of give your kind of base deterministic layer real supervisory value with those validation checks, concentration indicators, trend detection, and so on, but also accompanied by structured evidence packs. And these are then explainable by construction. They're reproducible, they're defensible, and they force the institution then to do the hard work that otherwise AI can obscure, kind of mask away with very nice seeming language, and therefore actually definitions are agreed, data quality problems are agreed, and actually the question itself can be clarified. None of these are open to interpretation. Then, if you're then using AI in that stack, okay, it can be more constrained, be more evidence-bound. Maybe stop where the evidence is insufficient, or tested comparatively against simpler baselines, for example. There's also some body of work around, there's a lot of talk around large language models, but no one's really exploring the capabilities of small language models, and can they offer different architectural choices? Can they also resource and cost efficiencies too, right? So I guess, on transferability, I'll say, I'll just be honest and optimistic really about the work. I think some of the hub outputs assume kind of some institutional preconditions that can be absent or nascent in some jurisdictions. And I think the ability for us to then take our work and say, well, actually, and there are examples of this. For example, we released a project on a modular payment system. It's also thinking about actually, and I mentioned, sorry, I'm not being clear, but I think it's thinking about the work in how they could apply both in advanced economies, emerging market, developing economies, and for different capabilities, and being able to articulate in that way. So my point I made around, for example, small language models and so on, is actually not everyone may have the capabilities, skills, investment, budget, security controls, anything to use that type of thing, or even, but maybe actually just doing the basics is good enough. Starting with the tools, the advanced analytics is good enough. And then going, okay, what do I need to use and how? But also thinking about the tools that also inform your architectural choices, and therefore the skills you need and the outcomes that you get from that. So I think on the technical side, it's not always about the big is always best. Actually, sometimes you can design things in a very pragmatic, practical way that then makes technologies like that easier to adopt, irrespective of the jurisdiction. So, I think there's some more thinking to be done there, because actually these are things that you can deploy in-house, you can use, but again, not enough work's been done on that. There's a lot of work around, okay, well, let's send our data into these large language models and to these big platforms, and you get lots of advice, but we need to do more on actually, what do we really need in our supervisory community? What's good enough? And what can we control? And what's predictable? And what can we explain? What can we defend? And actually maybe just, slow and steady wins the race. I'm always a big fan of Hare and the Tortoise. So, yeah, I think, I think a lot of it can be transferred. So I think it always, for transferability, I would always say it begins with the basics. Focus on your data skills, your data foundations, and also start to align, those who are your non-technicians to also think about what data and technology means. So you're bridging those two worlds, because actually you can't do these. You need cross-disciplinary skills, and that's what also makes this transferable, because then you can design things in the right way. The policy and tech aspects join up more, the policy and data aspects join up more, and if then that feeds into the people who need to design the systems, and therefore you're doing things more holistically. That also means that actually when you've got, for example, mandates that go across jurisdictions, a simple example of the use of the LEI, right? You don't want it to do on a piece by piece. I'm just use that as an example, but that should be embedded across all. Like it could be embedded across different data sets that actually link all these things together, and then make it easier then to kind of analyze these complex sets. But that type of thinking is needed, and I think then, you know, having you know, policymakers and others who understand kind of that data relationship also makes that easier to kind of achieve kind of the various goals. So yeah, I think, yeah, that was the last kind of notes I had. So yeah, Babak, I think you're on mute. Yeah.
My apologies, I was on mute. I was just going to say, Beju, thank you very much for that detailed elaboration. So now we're going to move to the round of Q&A from our audience, and I will ask our panelists to provide brief answers so we can get through as many of these as possible. So, Stefan, let me begin with you. Yasmin is asking, should AI help supervisors better be able to better fulfill multiple mandates at once? She gives a specific example, but I think other examples can probably be used as well. Increasingly, gender equality and financial inclusion is becoming a mandate, or is arising as a potential indicator that can inform other mandates, so runs across them. What is the role of AI here? What kind of guidance would you have for this? Thank you.
I would basically repeat what Beju just said. Start small. You can buy all sorts of complicated things off shelf, but if you buy very complicated things off shelf and they come from elsewhere, with a fairly high likelihood, it's going to be very difficult to use the stuff that you have bought. So at the end of the day, particularly if you have multiple objectives, AI isn't going to solve your problem. You're going to have to sit down in a conference room and decide how you weigh these various objectives against each other. And once you have passed that, then start with some simple system. But don't expect that technology can solve those nuances you have to pass judgment on by yourself and your peers.
That's good. And Yasmin, I would like to point out to you that Toronto Centre a couple of years ago did a pretty detailed toolkit on gender-aware supervision, where we didn't just talk about gender lens, we actually looked at sex disaggregated data. The funding for this was provided by an organization you may have heard of called the USAID. They're no longer around, but it was a very thorough study. I encourage you to take a look at that, because we dealt with a lot of those issues at a very granular level. Thank you. Let's go to Beju for the next question. Justin is asking, can you throw light on the role of using AI in examination report writing? Is it a tool that you can recommend for this purpose? Thank you.
I'm not going to recommend any tools as such, but I think this is no difference if you are able to use AI tools in your institution for examination report writing. I think there's a few things first, and my head immediately goes to, well, you know, do you want to be putting that information out into an AI system that you know, is it external? Are you hosting it yourself? Let's assume you're hosting it in-house, right? It's not going to give you the final answer. So it's a sparring partner. So it might shave 2 or 3 hours off of your work, but you still need to check it. You still need to understand, is it giving you the right details? Has it captured the nuance? Has it got the right context? And to the last question again, multiple mandates again. That right now, I don't think we're there. Context matters, really does matter to an AI model. You can also use it, for example, does this briefing, does it sound gender equal or whatever it might be? So use it as a sparring partner and use it as that, but is it giving you the right thing, right? Is it giving you that? But ultimately that sits with you. So I would say, yeah, if you were going to use it, maybe, and you're able to use it in your institution, use it to speed up your work or challenge or to go, does this make sense based on whatever tools you have? But these are all subject to, are you able to do it? Do you have the right control, security policies, etc., etc.? But yeah, I mean, no one tool, but some tools vary between, they do vary in capability, and it's all down to the model that you've been allowed to use in-house. So some organizations, for example, they're okay using still GPT 3.5, but that's a far cry from where the models are today, for example. So, yeah.
Thank you, Beju. So, Justin, this is a challenge we're all facing, right? Any one of us who has tried to write a report and try to take advantage of AI to get a bit of an edge on time, you realize that it just is not one of those things that spits out a report perfectly. Like, it really depends on the prompts you give it, how much you engage it. The longer you engage it, the better. So I'm with Beju on this. It's not something one can recommend or not recommend. It's how you use it. And by all means, experiment with that. And I think we all need to do that. Good question. Thank you. Stefan, Jean is asking, how do you see competition amongst jurisdictions and regulators impacting collaboration in innovation? Interesting question. How would you see this?
It depends on which jurisdictions you're talking about, but wearing my old chairman of the Basel Committee hat and reminding myself of the hundreds of pages of technical stuff that the Basel Committee has put out. In many cases, I would argue that also in quite advanced economies, you just don't have the resources to do that on your own. And it really pays to cooperate. And in addition to that, when we're talking about money or financial assets and liabilities, given that we don't have any transportation constraints anymore, so you can do something across the globe over the internet, and you can move the money around, if I simplify, by the push of a button. That clearly, in my view, creates a need for supervisors to cooperate at the global level. And it really pays to do that, because some of these things, as I said, are so technically difficult to deal with. So you actually it's enormously helpful to talk to peers compared to you sitting at home trying to reinvent the wheel. So the more we invent, the more we should talk to each other at the global level. That's my view.
Good answer. I mean, yes, we all need to hold hands and walk across a very busy Hanoi street, I guess. Uh, sorry. Beju, as you can see, we have a lot of courageous participants here. So let me pose the question from our courageous anonymous. How do you manage model risk when models change frequently or learn over time? Thank you.
Yeah, and this is something that we're exploring, the concept of model agility. So you have cryptographic agility, your ability to swap out algorithms when they change. It's things like that. So I think here there's something that we're exploring through an upcoming project we have on to kind of just think about actually what that means in practice. But I think it's one of these things of control what you can, and you also then have to build in even more test suites and other things around that, and be able to, if you are going to swap out to, let's say, the next version of it, how are you going to replay the results? Is it learning the same way? Are there other things that are going on with that? So actually this introduces a lot more complexity than previous, because you're just getting into behavioral type element or reasoning type elements that can vary even between two different entry, right? So this is how you need to get predictability and testability around what you already know, and be able to replay all that and then reapply that should you change the model or learns over time, and be able to kind of do that. I don't think there's a clear answer on that yet, but it's being able to control what you can and also treating it as in a very risk managed way. But I think more needs to be done on this. So.
Good, thanks. Stefan, this next question is certainly for you as the former chair of the Basel Committee. You were there in a very consequential time and came up with very important standards. So they were revised nearly 2 years ago. Do you find that they adequately addressed AI and emerging technologies, given how rapidly the former has evolved over the past 2 years? If not, do you think another round of revision is needed sooner than later? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I mean, it took, what, 10 years or something like that after the global financial crisis to eventually get to what is called Basel III, and then it has taken another 10, 15 years to implement everything. And of course, in the meantime, the world changes. So one just has to have to live with the fact that when the world changes, you have to kind of go with the flow. And then you have to ask yourself, are there new risks? Are there new things that we need to be mindful of when it comes to these things? I don't deal with the daily minutiae of the Basel Committee's work presently, so it's hard to say that things should actually change because of AI. I would say that things always change one way or the other, and it's not based on AI or any other new technology as such. It's more sort of understanding what's going on around us. And based on that, do we come to the conclusion that what was said 10 years ago or 20 years ago is a bit old and stale? And do we need to actually change a few things, taking into account what is going on presently? I think that's sort of the proper way to think about it, because nothing is ever sort of completely, totally, utterly constant in this world, and one needs to be mindful of that. Let me add to that without being too long-winding, since it also takes a long time to implement these things. Then if you change everything very rapidly, people wouldn't know what to implement because there are too many moving parts.
For giving your perspective on that. Let me move to Tashna's question, and this is for you, Beju. Could database management be replaced with AI automated tools since final decisions are with managers, leading to a decline in these support staff? So I guess it's a human resources kind of question. Thank you.
It's an interesting one. Some database management is already replaced by AI tools. You need to look at one of the largest big tech providers. Any infrastructure, these types of things are all programmable. That being said, we've all read about, for example, recent incidents where AI agents basically went and deleted their own things or went, oh, I don't need that anymore, right? So I don't say replaced. I think there's an evolution in terms of how IT systems, all these processes are managed, and there are increased AI components and AI processes within there. And as a result, there are declines in support staff. But I don't think it will. Not in the foreseeable future. I think there will have to be some. With all these things, there has to be some human oversight. But I guess it also varies by the institution too, right? Or the firm. So I'm quite happy they'll run the whole thing based on that stack and quite credibly do it. But for some institutions, that's not going to be the right thing to do. So.
Okay, great. So our panelists, we have a specific challenge. We have one question that I really want to get to from Oscar, and we're almost running against the time. So I'm going to ask Stefan, I'm going to generalize the question because there's some very specific things there. Do you think that scalability of data might be a problem in the near future, Stefan, in the context of AI, or actually AI allows you to scale it?
No, I actually do think that over time you can scale things, and I mean also given what's going on in the industry when it comes to the uh, number of server centers that are being built, I think it's inevitable that over time things will be scaled in one form or the other. But what is scalable in the short run and what is not scalable, then you pretty much have to be an IT engineer to be able to answer that question. But I'm convinced that it certainly is going to happen.
My apologies to Subin John and Rosina Knight. We just have to take your questions and deal with them as part of our courses and programs. Everything here is much appreciated. I'm going to bring this webinar to a close, first by thanking our excellent panelists. You provided very, very good and consistent insights. And essentially, what I gather from all of this is don't rely on AI. Let AI be your tool. Accountability and responsibility ultimately is yours. Nothing changes that. And I think that's absolutely critical. And at the same time, we're dealing with the perils. Sectors, industries, programs are getting eliminated with AI. And I just hope that we as humans know really what we are doing in this space. I want to thank our chief sponsors, Global Affairs Canada, the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA, and the IMF, and other international valued supporters of Toronto Centre. Really appreciate all the good questions and the audience that participated. And I think we want to follow up on this, and this is a good conversation, and it was really absolutely my pleasure to moderate. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. And if it's the evening, have a drink on me, and then take care. Bye bye.